Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of Afghanistan by Afghans, where you get introduced to some amazing Afghans. I repeat the word amazing for Afghans every episode, just so it goes in and becomes a thing, maybe. And today's guest is definitely amazing. I was impressed by her work. Um, she does a lot of different things, but I asked her, how do you want me to introduce you now? Because I know you do so many different things, but she said this: go with what attracted you first, and that is that she is a sex ed educator. She's a sex educator and trainer, and for someone who comes from an Afghan family and all of that, there's so many taboos around the topic. So she's a revolutionary in her own world, and coming out Muslim also. Her whole series is a whole different conversation on its own that we're going to have. So, without further ado, thank you, Wazina John. Welcome to the show.
Salam, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for translating your Farsi. You have to, because our audience are all non-Farsi speakers. So
Yeah, God knows. And if my daddy is, has such a Darlish, is that the word, like daddy and English combination that?
Oh, never heard of that one. Darlish. I never heard of that combination. Darlish.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. Okay, we're gonna have that in the show now. So, Wazina John, let's start off from the beginning. Would love to know, how did your family end up where they end up from Afghanistan? Where do they come from Afghanistan as well? And yeah, just let's get started with the
Yeah,
story.
my mom and dad, Mother and Bobim, they met in Kabul, but both have roots in Logad. My dad, very firmly in Logad, as like a farming agricultural background kid who came to Logad for Kabul for school, and my mom was like between Kunduz, was a little bit wealthier in her background, but then they were able to leave in the early 80s, like 1981, from Afghanistan to come to Queens, Flushing, New York, where there was a large, and well, I would still say there's a large like enclave of Afghans who came from both, and I think more than like the community now, that generation of like Afghans who immigrated have like settled there. And I grew up in Flushing in New York City, Queens, and have
Mhm.
continued to live there and be with them and around community and family, which I'm very grateful for, to be so in such proximity to them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In Flushing, I know we've talked with another guest. I mentioned that there's a huge Afghan Jewish population. I don't know if you ever run into them or know of them, of their existence, but
Yeah,
yeah,
not
there's like
personally, but I know of like my at family, like at concerts, like way back when.
uh
Thing, yeah.
yeah. I heard they had a synagogue and all of that. I hope at one point, at someday, I get to interview an
Yeah.
Afghan Jew in New York. That would be really cool.
Even
Um,
Afghan Christians, I think it's just like the breadth of our faith
mhm.
is of our faith is so impressive, because it informs the breadth of our cultural traditions.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the whole point of the show, to showcase how diverse we are. There's no
Mhm.
monolithic Afghan identity here. So for you, how was it growing up in New York as a child?
Embarrassingly, I say this that we are, and you say this, and I affirm that we are like there's like such wideness and a large scope around our faith and traditions and culture. But I grew up so close knit in such a way that I assumed that everyone who was Muslim was also Afghan. And if you were like in any way, shape, or form brown, South Asian, Iranian, Persian, something of that was a particular type of non-white but looked like my family. I just assume you're always Afghan, and I think that has a little bit to do with like language barriers. Like not actually learning English fully or till like like 9 or 10 or something years old. Um, but it was very insular growing up in where I grew up. And my mom has this joke, and I still say it, which is like, I could either socialize with my cousins or my siblings. Like my mom's like, I made you 3 siblings. These are your friends. So there was that close knitness, um, and also among all of the family members and people I spent time with, I have to like name that my parents are very generally in their own way very progressive, very kind of open and still non-traditional within their traditionalness, encouraging myself and my brother especially, and then later my sisters, to do the things that American kids did. Like, so I did ballet, I did dance, sports. My brother also very actively involved in that. And so there was this like inner and outer circle. Like these are the things we do at home, and these are the things you participate in outside of the house, because you should adapt. But when you're here, this is who you are.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And those cultures that included, I'm sure, cooking, because I know you have picked up cooking. Last time we talked, you were cooking up a dish, a traditional dish.
Yeah.
What else was kind of included in the inner circle home environment?
Language for sure. Like, while I wish I grew up speaking, well, I didn't grow up, but as a smaller child, spoke Pashto very fluently, and then and Farsi and Dari all throughout, and still to this day. That was like a very important element to maintain our faith and religion, but still holding it within this, like, for my father, always like being very moderate about it, whatever that meant. Um, yeah, food and the other thing is, even if we were to spend more time on this outer circle, like as we got older, where you could then choose how you spent your time. So even however much time I spent on this, like, again, out with friends or socializing, college, those different things, we had to return to different moments back, whether it was Eid, Ramadan, even Christmas. One year I tried to like not come home for Christmas. And my dad was like, everyone comes home for Christmas. Even people, soldiers come home. It's the prophet's birthday. We have the day off. We have to come home. And I was like, oh, okay. I wanted to have a day off elsewhere, but that's okay. So cultural, like just time off together, having those intimate moments.
Nice.
Um,
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. It's so wonderful. I asked the same question from everyone, and it's so beautiful to see just the diversity of answers that kind of come up and of experiences. I always think, oh, they're going to tell me just the same thing, but no, every time I'm surprised of what I hear about how kind of people, Afghan Americans, grew up in the U.S. Even if people were in the same street, Queens, New York, it's a hugely different experience. So now let's get to the good stuff. Kind
Yeah.
of, how did you get into what would later or currently kind of defines a lot of your work? And so tell me kind of the journey into that.
Yeah, it was very much because of that insularness, that, as every single human being, regardless of their background, there's like curiosity and questions and wondering, and am I normal? Is this real? Is this like a thing that should be growing in my body? So there's, those natural questions. And then there's also the natural and normal, very common experiences with your first sex ed teacher, which is your family, right? Talking about it is an explicit lesson, but also not talking about topics related to bodies and puberty is also a very explicit lesson. But I came into it because I had questions, and I realized that the answers that I would get here and there in drips and drops, or whatever, however you say it, were not satiating my curiosity and my need for answers. And I also did grow up without internet until like my last year of high school. And even then, did I even know how an AOL chat room worked to get real answers? No, right? So I would research my own stuff as a kid, like in the library. And then as I entered college years, I knew I wanted to spend more time in the getting answers for the things that I had as a younger human being around bodies, and like, is this normal? And more as I embodied my sexual identity, or like wondered, like, is it normal to have a crush on a girl, and that sort of thing, wanting to those answers. And so my journey has been such that I am basically returning to younger Wazina at all times. And also my parents, like always wanting to answer and work with families and stakeholders, or educate and anyone in such a way that it never makes somebody feel like they, for lack of a better word, are dumb or don't know or should know. Why don't you know this? Because the most eldest adult in our lives that we, has all the wealth of experience, doesn't always have these answers.
Right.
or they're developing their answers and they've never been asked to give the answer. Like they might have the answer, but we never asked them. And so this is like kind of the journey brought me to sex ed in this way. Yeah.
I since you mentioned your family a lot, I definitely would want to know when you broke it out to them, what was their reaction,
Mhm.
and how was that conversation? How did that go down?
So initially, not very great. And I think they were also, because I was an educator, right? I'm not just I'm a sexuality educator, and I didn't go to school to be an educator. I went to school to be, essentially, in the end, the dream was to like work for the UN, right? Do some sort of like international development, global maternal health type work. And then when I fell into teaching in this format, this like community educator, I think my parents were like, you didn't go to school for this. How are you going to be a teacher? That
Yeah.
A. And then the sexuality stuff was, I think I generally skirted around it. I
Uh-huh.
called it diversity for a long time. And then so that happened, right? And then I actually went into LGBT, like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, same sex, gender loving, kind of like diversity work for like about 2-3 years. And that I definitely did not talk about. And then when I actually returned to the classroom full time teaching sex ed, I was like, this for all of us, it was a sigh of relief. My parents were like, okay, she teaches HIV. We understand that's an issue. She teaches bodies. And most of all, the beautiful part was that they embraced, and all of my like family members and uncles, my dad's friends were like, Maluma, see, you're a teacher. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's like second to being, I mean, I don't know if every Afghan says this, like second to being like a mullah or like a mother or a father, because that's how much power you hold.
Mhm.
And so it took a little bit of time, but by the time they learned really, and I learned how to boldly and safely and like and proudly say that I'm a teacher who teaches these subjects, they followed along with my comfort.
Mm.
Like I think that's a big part of all of this, like everything that I've done. And when we feel emboldened and powerful and confident in who we are and what we're up to and why we're doing it,
Mhm.
most people will follow, or at least give you the space to do it. They may not co-sign it, but they're like, okay, that's you, that's me, we're different, but I hold both at the same time.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. Wow, that's beautiful. Um, I mean, you mentioned earlier, like your education before kind of going into sex ed. Of course, that wasn't intentional. Was it just the curiosity of your own self that kind of led to this career path to kind of take on education, or was there more other things? I'm thinking like socially, had anything happen or anything kind of around that time that kind of like, oh, this is something that I need to take on
Mm-hmm.
as somebody that I can contribute to that discourse.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think being an Afghan or Afghan, that very much informs that, and has always been part of like the vessel in which all the other curiosities and questions, like, and I want to do this because of this reason. Growing up in New York City, I grew up both within, at the same time, with HIV as a conversation, like the AIDS crisis, right? More than HIV, like we call it the AIDS crisis, right? Like that came up, and the fear around what does this mean? Like thinking about it almost at the same time, like when COVID became like was a thing in the early time. Like we didn't, everyone was like pulling at things like ways to like prevent it, and it really was like akin to that memory to me when I was younger. So like thinking about HIV, holding that, and then also holding at the same time all of the subtle and not so subtle impressions and expressions of what it meant to be an Afghan girl in a public school setting, having teachers be like, oh, or also being a very invisible Muslim girl, like very like proudly Muslim, having henna on my fingers or that sort of thing to mark Eid. And then having these these microaggressions, or these like, oh, you're Muslim. And while again, not all Afghans are Muslim, all this messaging around what people expect, who they thought we would be, the impression that I was like somehow like kept under a rock all the time,
Mhm.
right? And pushing back against gender expectations is also part of sex ed, is part of sexuality. And so all these kind of like culminated, and I was like, I need to like say something back, but I need to say something back in such a way. And I was always educating, right? Like, we're always educating all of us, every single Afghan kid, regardless of where you go. Well, if you didn't grow up in Afghanistan, probably, but even then, right? Like, in any place you lived, you were educating by living, by offering this new and different milestone, impression, imagination of the people around you. So for me, that was a large part. And then also, again, being like a queer identified person really early on, I wanted answers for like why this was the case, and was there anything actually that different about my bodily stuff from cis and straight other girls? Was there anything that was going to be different? Like, should I, like, so I held all those like 3, 4, 5 multiple identities at the same time that offer that urgency, or like, I need to do something about this.
Yeah. There are so many multiple identities kind of you're dealing with. I mean, obviously, the most probably conflicting identity would probably be, more than even Afghan and gay, would have to be Muslim and gay, correct? But, I mean, so tell me a little bit about kind of, within all faiths and all kind of major faiths, that this concept of, what is accepted as a form of sexuality is kind of, in many faiths, it's written down, right? So how do you explain it to individuals who hold onto these faiths as truths? To how do you explain to them, where does this sexuality concept kind of lies and the faith? How can they coexist? How would you go about explaining that to them?
I usually take this very maybe cheap way. And I'll explain why I mean cheap, because I am not in the business or in like the desire oftentimes to be in a theological debate,
Hmm.
because it doesn't work, right? Any debate, any like pushing back on, because those are such deeply held, right, values. And there are so many reasons why I hold Islam so near and dear to my heart without any reason, right? Like, and reason, and that's for an irrational reason, and that's okay. Like, I'm on the side of irrational all the time, because reason, to me, still reasoning and rational, like academia essentially is what I mean to say, like lives within this like constructs that also serve particular like purposes, white supremacy, right? And so, and usually I find them to be so anti-Muslim also, but not a universal truth. So I err on the side of saying, I believe that all the things that are inside of me, Allah put inside of me. And I don't know if I have it right all the time, but that's part of like what makes me human, is human and Muslim, is that striving to learn and to engage and to like understand it. And then I also often will say, when people, and that's like not usually a good, then people are like, then don't call yourself Muslim. I'm like, no, I will. The other thing I'll say is that there are many, like the Quran is to me, a very living, breathing document, or like a body of work, right? It can not even like adaptation. We can return to it, and it kind of is fresh and holds new answers each time. And I said it so that everyone has a different relationship to the text and Allah. And beyond that, there's no singular truth within Islam. Like the same way that folks who do really shitty things, like that burn down schools or buildings and planes, right? No one is really going around saying that is a bad Muslim. And yet we go around like finger pointing like someone who doesn't wear like their chadar right, or their veil, or like shows too much skin, or does X, Y, Z. And I'm like, why are we spending our time on these not as necessary moments, these humans? And so there's that element. So I just like, there's no single, and I will always just say that like I have no claim on Islam. And should I be misleading people, I apologize, and God will like tell me in the end that I did that I shouldn't have done that. But I don't own it as like this is like the absolute truth.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I just want people to know that I know that at the crux of it, God loves us, loves me, loves people, like has made us to have these tests and experiences, and I just want people to know that they have like they're allowed to be with God and with Islam. And I just want people to like know like you don't have to leave it, because for many of us, I try to leave it or like step away for a minute or just say I'm not that religious, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a secular Muslim, and that was like tearing a piece of my guts out. I felt very limp and like I was wilting when I removed that
Mm-hmm.
part of myself.
Wow. Okay. So you're focusing it more on the experiential aspect of it, saying, God is, an entity to which I believe in, but there's also this other reality with which I'm also grappling or living.
Mhm.
And for you, they coexist. But I like how you were kind of humble and you said, that it doesn't have to be for others in that way. It doesn't have to make sense to others.
Mhm.
Um, and that gets me to my next question is how can people, you're going to educate us here now. How can people be accepting of differences? In your case, it might be sexual. In other cases, it may be other things. How could they be accepting of differences or more accepting of differences where that difference supposedly is so different or against their core belief?
Mm.
Is there a way to establish kind of like a platform of acceptance in an easier way where people could actually accept these differences, even if it goes against their core belief?
You know, I mean, I think so. I believe so, and I think that it's just essentially holding space for the human, right? Like you don't have to co-sign necessarily that part of them, or participate in it with them, but going above and beyond to eliminate their option and ability to live their full life, I think to me is like very un-Islamic or just like anti-human. It's like inhumane at this, um, and so I think for me that is a big part of it. And a friend a long time ago had said to me, and a sentiment that I've heard in different lots from many different Muslims, that like in the end, like only Allah is able to judge, right? Like there's no it feels almost un-Islamic to say like that makes a good Muslim, that makes a bad Muslim, because everything's written in your heart, and like only God can see that stuff, that part of you. And so for me, it's just if it's infringing on your ability to live your life in the way that you want to and need to, then you must like remove yourself, don't engage. But let's not I don't ever want to like make an active effort. I would not like to see people make an active effort to like interrupt those individuals lives and living.
Mhm. Right.
And especially as we live in different countries and cultures, I think we have dispersed, right, like across the globe.
Mhm.
um and there are moments where like and especially my dad always reminds me, he's like, sometimes, Wazina, it feels like it's easier to be Muslim in this country than it was in Afghanistan. Only because there was such like
Strict.
narrowness in the time that he lived there, right? Like this narrow tribal, and then like Shia, not Shia, this kind of like divisions. He's like, we lived in an apartment building with like 100 families and 100 different cultures and 100 different things, and not a single one of us was like fighting each other.
Mhm.
You walk through the elevator, you run back and forth, and I was like, oh yeah. And I say that because part of it is when we are in other places and countries, like we can hope, inshallah, hopefully, right, hold our cultural stuff, be able to like live within our religious and social and traditional values, and then we also have to participate in the larger context, this larger
Mhm.
cultural social context we're in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why I think sex ed to me, and I just say, is like can be in everyone's family. It doesn't mean you have to hold and honor the values of sexuality and sexual identities, and that the larger cultural folks hold. You can
Mhm.
still hold it, the ones that are really part of your inner circle.
Mm. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. I know we've kind of talked about your sex ed, but you've also had some other cool projects, which I want to hear about. So tell us some of the things you've been involved with, especially after the August event, or just in the past recent years. I know
Yeah.
yet your TED talk was on sexuality. I was thinking your TED talk was on something else, but it was on this actually. So tell me about some of the other projects.
Yeah. And actually the TEDx talk was more, it was like kind of saying that like I, as a, as like a queer identified person in the US, especially, I'm a very palatable Muslim to people. So like really comparing that, like all the spaciousness that people give me within my, like their ability to be like, oh yeah, love is love, that sort of thing. And like, get it, that like there's multiple genders and sexual identities. I wish they would still hold that for Muslims, right? Like, I wish there would be offered that multitude, that spaciousness, that generosity, and that imagination for us as Muslims, like be able to like just be that open. So I've been up the opportunity to do a TEDx talk, which is like, amazing for me, like such a proud moment. Coming Out Muslim has continued to like iterate and like be shared around the country and like North America, Canada, really. And like I was able to actually bring some of it on the quiet level to Sudan a couple of years ago and share that, which was like a remarkable experience, because it was like the ability to like connect with generally like straight Muslims who were like, whoa, you choose to be Muslim and you're like, don't have to, like somehow I have an out, where they were sharing that like, I'm a straight Muslim and I don't even know if I want to be Muslim all the time. And that just, I was just waiting for the sound to say like, I don't know, it's not always given to maybe the straight people, right? And I really was like honored by that intimate sharing. And I've also been doing like more storytelling projects. I'm really very curious and interested in the rites of passages that we create and co-create as diaspora people, and kids and families, because we often grow up being like this, everything was this better, let's just say this coded for everything was better when we were in Afghanistan. And we did this way, we did Eid this way. There was no such thing as birthdays, which was a thing that I have dealt with living in the United States, and being like, do I get a birthday? But we create these new rites of passages and we don't realize we're doing that. And I'm naming and like noticing that. And that specifically in one project that I've been taking on, is around death, dying, and the choreography of our burials. And that it is an art, for lack of a better word. It is a skill that we don't learn anymore, because we're up to things like we're up to like being successful, and we don't get to learn that tradition. And so for me, it's been practicing how to die, essentially, right? Like how to prepare my suitcase, how to prepare my kafan, and how to help other people prepare that for themselves as well, as particularly as we are, when we are people who have multiple identities, right? And those multiple identities still are held with shame. And so what can I bury right now in my living in order to live a very self-expressed life and experience, which is very much what is at the heart of my sex ed. What can I learn and understand about myself so I'm like fully self-expressed?
Yeah, and I remember you mentioning that with this project, you're collaborating or doing it together with another friend of yours, another Afghan. And is it going to be more of a performance, or is it a private performance? Just the two of you guys are doing? How would it go down, the process?
It goes down in multiple ways. It is, ideally, it is like an installation. It is an opportunity for people who, Afghans and Muslims, non-Muslims, everyone to kind of like witness the stages of death, dying, and mourning. So that includes the body preparation, like the washing, the kafan, the shrouding, and then the mourning part, like the khatam part, like the duas. And one of the reasons for that, and I'm doing this with a dear friend, Dr. Qais Munhazem, and he and I have been blending, like pushing on some parts of it, which are a little bit non-traditional, like like mixed gender wrapping of one another. However, the other element of this is also to allow us to visualize a dignified death. Like, what does it mean to die with dignity? Because I would say that all the things that I've tried to do, activism, advocacy, being mean, being nice, being humble, whatever it is, right? Like all these are not yielding results for me right now, or for all of us, like, right, as a collective, like my results are meant to like to be like like Afghans across the globe, and for Muslims, and to like interrupt all these hateful things. And so as a teacher, I'm like, wait, maybe I should go backwards, because that's what you do as a teacher. You backwards plan. You like say, okay, if I want my students to learn XYZ and master it, this is the goal. So I'm going to go backwards to make all my lessons my unit, so that it all feeds into this result, right? Like mastering the SAT, whatever it is, whatever you're mastering. I was like, what if I do the same thing with death? So if I can offer and visualize a dignified death, then that will allow anybody who witnesses it in an installation, or if it's a write, we have it in writing as well. There's like little clips and videos of it on social media. Then maybe it'll allow them to then imagine us with dignity in our living, and that's how they'll interact with us.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. You're introducing dignity at the end to kind of backtrack. Oh, I like that. Wow. Very, very cinematic. Very beautiful. Nice.
I do it all in iMovie, so please, if anybody wants to participate in making it look a little bit more cinematic, please let me
No,
know.
that's wonderful. Wow, wow, this is wonderful. Well, it's been a wonderful conversation with you. I feel like we can talk a lot more, obviously. I'm very happy to hear about your project, and we'll put links in the description for anybody who gets interested and wants to kind of check it out, whether it's in one location or traveling. But I thank you again for coming on the show and, giving us a piece of your mind, a piece of your story, educating us, and kind of opening our eyes on how to be more accepting and inclusive.
I hope so, inshallah. And you're doing that. I mean, like inherently in this podcast, in this video cast, Afghans by Afghans, Afghanistan by Afghans. Yeah, and making it really human.
That's the aim. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being on the show. And for audiences out there, if you like this conversation, there is more conversation with other Afghans. So definitely check out more in the series and enjoy this conversation and follow up on the links to get to know Wazina Jan a little bit more, watch her talk and her future art installation and all her good stuff. So thank you very much, Wazina Jan, once again. Bye-bye.